Chinese robots are smashing world records and on more than one occasion smashing themselves. This is footage from the World Humanoid Robot Games. It's an event in Beijing which has seen 2,000 humanoid robots compete in various sporting competitions. This robot beat Usain Bolt's 100-meter world record. Bolt did it in 9.58 seconds. A robot managed it in 9.39 seconds. A robot also beat the human high jump record. So the record for a human man is 2.45 meters. The robot managed 2.88 meters. Though it should be noted, it didn't have to clear a bar. It just jumped up and down. So I'm not actually sure it should count, but somewhat impressive nonetheless. There are also giant robotic dogs. They look threatening. I'm not sure what they were doing in terms of the sporting competition, but striking.
Dressage?
Something like that. I suppose dressage. Yeah, he's doing dressage. Then it would be a horse, not a dog, and I saw it described as a dog, but I suppose it could be anything. It looks a bit like Katy Perry in the Super Bowl halftime show. Did you see that, where she's going on the tiger for Raw? Anyway, in favour of Team Human, when it comes to football, the evidence from Beijing suggests we do still have a while left as the dominant species at the pinnacle of the game. They're not very good at football at all, and they do seem sort of very vulnerable to tackles. And also, actually, I mean, this is probably the most viral footage from the games.
Looks like Harry Kane.
Which is another moment where robotic athletes proved just as fragile as their fleshy brethren. So this is one of those very fast robots who goes straight into the wall, bounces back and sets on fire. It's all pretty captivating footage. And these are videos that have just been all over my timeline this weekend. But what's the point of it all? Well, Chang Che is a writer focusing on China and technology. Earlier this year, he wrote a long read for The Guardian on China's robotics revolution. For that piece, Chang Che talked to executives from 11 robotics companies across 5 Chinese cities. And when I caught up with him earlier, I asked him what China might be trying to prove with the humanoid robot games.
I think that China's trying to say that they are here. They have been working to be a technological power since the 1990s when they started on this market takeoff. And since then, they started with, cheap goods like shoes and toys. And now they are dominating in some of the leading technologies of the future, like robots and AI. And semiconductors and all sorts of different kinds of technologies. And this is just an example of one of the primary ways that China is trying to showcase that the country is now a technological power as well as a military economic power.
And I suppose taking a step back, what are these games proving? Because, obviously these are humanoid robots which are running much faster than they've ever run before and jumping higher. And I mean, they're less convincingly playing football, but I mean, clearly there's some kind of advance here. At the same time, do we need a fast humanoid robot? What is being proved?
That's a good question. I mean, so just to take a little bit of a step back, I mean, these games are in its second year, so it's still pretty new. What came before that was just an explosion of robotics companies in China. So around 2023, 2024, you saw, the government started to talk about robotics as this really important direction, this technological direction. There was this explosion in investment in China. Different cities and different localities started to invest in their own robotics champions. So you had this already an enormous surplus of companies and talent and investment and capital moving into this space. And I think what happened was that the Beijing government decided that they just wanted a way of showcasing what was going on. And so they started to organize this event to kind of bring all of these companies together because they were already sort of making robots for all sorts of these applications. Let's just have them in this really neat format where we can actually start to compare how they're doing and have a ton of foreign journalists come and show them what China's capable of. So I think that that's a little bit of a backdrop. In terms of, just to answer your question directly, I think what you can see from the past 2 years, the major difference that I've noticed is in hardware. So if you look at the race and the sprint, there was this 100-meter dash where the robot beat Usain Bolt. That's an improvement in hardware. Those are hardware problems that the Chinese engineers have solved between last year and this year. Now, if you notice that, the story of that sprint was that the robot wasn't able to stop at the end of the sprint, and it ran into the wall and it basically like self-destructed. That's an example of something that's a software problem. That's a software problem because the robot didn't recognize that it finished the race and it didn't have the ability to stop. And so there's a little bit of a difference, I think, between software and hardware. I think we can say that in terms of hardware, China's robots are improving very quickly.
And the software, I mean, to be clear, here we're talking about LLMs and artificial intelligence, are we? So, I mean, that's what's sort of powering, well, obviously not the electricity that's powering them, but sort of what's dictating what they do is an AI model, which is inside, or a few chips inside these robots.
So the backdrop to the software question is that it's like, why are robots a big thing now rather than say 10 years ago? And the reason is because of ChatGPT. What happened after ChatGPT was that people realized that if you smash enormous amounts of data with enormous amounts of computational power, in this right now the most powerful is NVIDIA chips, you can create some semblance of intelligence. And we've proved that with language. And now people think that they can prove this with robots, which means that instead of feeding robots language, you're feeding robots something, these various kinds of visual data. So that can include, spatial data. There's a lot of like something like a GoPro level kind of data that's being fed into these models. And so they're not called LLMs, but they're called VLMs, video language or visual language models.
And that's because, and this is, I mean, your article for The Guardian, you sort of had an interesting segment on this, because obviously for LLMs or for the large language models, what they did was they just fed them all the information that had ever been written down. So sort of Reddit, Wikipedia,
exactly,
plus scanning in books. Yeah. When it comes to a robot and what you're sort of dealing with is audiovisual data, is a bit harder, right? Because that isn't all sort of documented somewhere in a big file. So they have to employ actual humans to either wear GoPros while they're going about daily tasks or control these robots remotely, but all the while sort of feeding back to train the models. Could you talk about that a bit, please?
Yeah. So the biggest difference, just to ask a question back at you, why does it feel like AI has been moving and improving at like light speed over the past few years, but robots haven't really progressed? Like we haven't actually seen robots, right? I mean, if they're both AI, the robots should be here. Like we should have robots next to us now, right? And the biggest reason is because there just isn't the data. Like the robots don't have something to learn from, right? So we trained Gemini, Claude, and ChatGPT on the internet. We literally gave it the internet and was like, here's all of human knowledge in text form, learn from it. But we don't have we don't have an internet worth of visual data for a robot to do. It's a little bit different with autonomous driving. Like that's something that is currently being, that's probably the closest example of like something that we've been trying to feed it an enormous amount of like car visual data. But in terms of like, for a robot to wash the dishes, we just don't have human data of dishwashing. And so what you see now is a lot of companies are trying to, hire workers to like wear gadgets at home and like all these sensors while they're doing household chores. And part of that is because they want to collect the data for that. So in China, you're seeing this kind of massive build out of data collection warehouses and facilities right now to basically collect the data for this kind of work.
Okay, even more fundamental question now. Why humanoids? Obviously sort of, a useful machine can be many different shapes. Sort of evolution gave us 2 arms, 2 legs and a head, somewhat arbitrary, right? For many tasks, you can think of a better shaped sort of being. Why are these companies sort of doubling down on humanoid robots specifically?
Okay, do you want my cynical answer or do you want the answer that founders typically will tell you?
Maybe both, so we can compare and contrast.
Okay, so the way that the founders will typically frame this question is that if you look at the human world, it's built for our bodies. So it just makes natural sense that you build robots that are shaped in the form of a human, because then they can enter without redesigning spaces, all the spaces that humans can go, which I think makes a lot of sense. But if you look at the practicality of how we got here, I think that it's actually, the cynical answer is that China is very much reacting to and kind of thinking through the lens of the United States. And when you talk to the founders, and I asked them this question to the founders in China who are building robots, I'm like, why are you guys building humanoids? And they were like, because Elon Musk is doing it.
And why is Elon Musk doing it? I mean, for the lols, maybe.
Well, I think that Elon Musk has like this really grand vision where the robots, he's imagining that these robots are going to be able to do everything in the future. Like if you talk to him and his prediction about what robots are doing, it's gonna be like, yeah, I think he said at some point like years ago, like, oh, it's gonna be able to babysit, it's gonna mow the lawn, it's gonna be able to go to a factory. His imagination is that this robot is gonna be able to build Tesla cars and then come home with you at night and take care of your 3-year-old child. Like it's gonna be able to do everything, which is extremely ambitious, right? Like you can imagine that a different approach that's a lot more modest would be something like designing a specific robot for each specific kind of task. But that's not what Elon Musk is known for.
Okay, I've got another broad question for you. So the debate going on both in the West and China, as far as I understand it, is how quickly can this technology replace people's jobs? In the United States, the focus is more on white collar jobs because it's these chatbots that are sort of the cutting edge of AI. In China, much more focused on physical jobs and robotics. Which society do you think will be better prepared for and better able to deal with the challenge of mass job displacement?
I don't know if I can give you an answer of which is better than the other right now, but I can sort of think through it out loud with you. So I think that in China, there is just a general acceptance, both from the leadership and the population, that technology is coming and it's going to come whether you like it or not. So oftentimes you have this kind of like learned helplessness in China where it's like, okay, the technology is coming no matter what, and so when people lose their jobs, it's not something that can kind of create a kind of political or social resistance. Whereas in the United States, that is extremely powerful. I think it's so in the UK as well. I think in general, just Western countries have a little bit more of this culture of, hey, and you can see this right now with the data center backlash, right? So this is like a really big difference in the United States and China. China just builds data centers. They don't have to deal with the public resistance to that. Americans are extremely pissed off that they're having to share electricity with these big tech companies coming into their neighborhoods and building massive data centers. So I think that what's going to happen in the next few years is very soon, I think, is you're just going to see a lot more political resistance to this kind of stuff and the rollout of robots. I mean, these are things that I think anybody in the United States has to think about. Like, okay, we're going to build a robot. It's going to replace these workers. What's the political resistance? What do I have to do in order to soften that? That's not a problem that China has to deal with. So I think who is better positioned? I mean, I don't know. I think China is in a weird, kind of dark, cynical way because it's just not a society that is used to this kind of like labor revolt.
I suppose the alternate argument as to why sort of this could end up better for the masses in China than it would in the United States is because oligarchic power is a bit more of a big deal in the United States. Obviously, it's not because China is more democratic, but there is potentially a stronger state that could redistribute the gains of any job displacing revolution. I don't know if you think that's sort of overly optimistic about sort of China's prospects.
Well, I think that my like kind of sense of the way that the US and China is operating is that they are obviously they're completely different systems, but these kinds of questions, because they're both being transformed so quickly with AI, you see these questions arise in China and the United States, but how they're going to react to them is going to be different. So in the United States, obviously there's a massive question about distribution. Bernie Sanders wrote like an op-ed about how we should have like ownership over AI. The whole country should have ownership over AI. These debates are being played out in public. I think in China, it's you hear it among economists and you hear the debate within sort of policymaking circles, like, okay, at some point, the public is going to be very dissatisfied if all this money is being concentrated by, by capitalists and by our tech companies. Is there a way that we can find a way to distribute? But the way that they will do this is through some kind of top-down policy, whereas in the United States, it's going to come through a kind of democratic process. So I guess, the question is the American democratic process going to get there first, or is the authoritarian model where there's a sort of like they're sort of like trying to preempt a revolt from the public, is that going to beat the democratic system? And at this point, I don't know.
That was the journalist Chang Che speaking to me earlier today. Really fascinating interview. One of the most interesting questions in the world right now, isn't it? Which system is going to deal better with the destruction of jobs, the Chinese or the Americans? My money is probably on the Chinese, but obviously it could go either way.